Why did the laughter stop the moment she dropped her tray? The sound echoed louder than it should have, plastic against concrete, a harmless mistake, yet every voice in the mess hall died at once. 200 soldiers froze mid-bite, mid-sentence, mid-laugh. Forks hovered, chairs creaked. Someone near the back let out a quiet whistle. She bent down quickly, cheeks burning, fingers shaking as she gathered the scattered utensils. Her hands were small, too careful, too soft for a place like this. Her fitted gray t-shirt clung lightly to her frame beneath an oversized uniform jacket that clearly didn't belong to her. Blonde hair tied into a messy bun, loose strands slipping free like she'd stopped fighting them hours ago. She looked out of place. That was all it took. "Well, I'll be damned," a voice cut through the silence, loud, confident, cruel. "Since when did Halloween come early on base?" Laughter erupted, sharp, immediate, hungry. She froze mid-reach, fingers closing around a plastic fork as heat rushed to her face. Sergeant Derek Callahan stepped forward, boots heavy against the floor, his shadow swallowing her whole. He was tall, broad, carved from routine and authority. The kind of man who never doubted whether a room belonged to him. "Who authorized this?" he continued, sweeping a hand toward her like she was debris. "This is a military installation, not a community theater." Phones appeared, quietly at first, then boldly, screens glowing, recording. She stood up slowly, clutching the tray to her chest like a shield. Her shoulders curved inward. Her gaze dropped, not in fear, but in calculation no one recognized. "I have orders," she said, soft, almost swallowed by the room. "Orders?" Callahan laughed. "From who? Your drama coach?" More laughter, louder now. She felt it then, the familiar tightening in her chest. Not panic, not shame, something older, something disciplined. The feeling of being watched without being seen, of being underestimated again. She could end it now. But that wasn't why she was here. 18 minutes, she reminded herself. In the corner, Captain Ethan Drake lowered his newspaper just enough to observe her posture. The trembling hands, the lowered chin, and beneath it control, micro-adjustments, balanced stance, calm breathing, the kind you learn when panic gets people killed. "Interesting." Callahan circled her like a bored predator. "You lost, sweetheart." She shook her head once, barely. Lieutenant Angela Pierce joined him, heels clicking, expression polished into practiced disdain. "Sweetie," she said, smiling too wide, "the cosplay club meets off base." The words landed hard, not because they hurt, but because they were familiar. She'd heard worse, in worse places, with bullets in the air. Her fingers curled slightly behind her back, grounded, ready. A voice from the side broke through, young, uneasy. "Sergeant, maybe just leave her alone." Callahan turned sharply. "Private, did I ask for your opinion?" The young soldier swallowed. "No, sir." Silence returned, thicker now. "Thought so." Callahan turned back to her. "You know drill commands, princess." She lifted her chin just enough. "Yes, Sergeant." Something in her tone shifted, crisp, exact. "Attention." Her body snapped into place, perfect alignment, boots planted, spine straight, stillness so precise it made the room falter. Murmurs rippled. About face. Executed flawlessly. Present arms. Her hands rose into position. Imaginary weapon, exact angle, perfect muscle memory. Phones lowered. Callahan's smile twitched. "Beginner's luck," he muttered, pulling his sidearm free and clearing it theatrically. "Field strip it, 30 seconds." She took the pistol without a word. Her fingers moved. Not fast. Efficient. Each piece separated with quiet clicks. Springs, barrel, slide, ordered, clean. 15 seconds. Reassembly was smoother, quieter, as if the weapon trusted her. 27 seconds total. She handed it back. Silence fell like a held breath. Callahan stared at the gun, then at her. Huh, he scoffed. Watched a lot of movies. She stepped back into position, head lowered again, still playing the part. But Drake had seen enough to know this wasn't an act. This was restraint. Orders were checked, records reviewed, challenges escalated, and M4 medical scenarios, tactical questions. She answered all of them. Not proudly, not defiantly, calmly. Knowledge flowed from her like it had been waiting. Range distances, combat triage, land navigation, each answer landing with quiet certainty. The room shifted, unease replacing arrogance. Callahan didn't retreat, he doubled down. Strip search, he said. The words landed wrong, even to him. The room tensed. Colonel Mitchell stepped forward. Sergeant. It's protocol, Callahan snapped. She spoke before the colonel could finish. It's fine. That stopped everything. Her hands moved to the buttons of her jacket. Slow, deliberate. Drake's instinct screamed. This was the moment. The jacket slid off her shoulders. The gray t-shirt beneath clung tighter than before, defined muscle, no softness left to mock. Shirt, Callahan ordered. She inhaled once, controlled, measured. Then lifted the fabric. Gasps rippled as black ink emerged, first lines, then scales, then fire. Two dragons, intertwined, balanced, ancient, deadly. The dragon. Recognition spread faster than fear. Colonel Mitchell snapped to attention, salute sharp enough to cut air. Lieutenant Victoria Brennan, he said, voice tight. Call sign, Ghost Dragon, Navy SEAL. Phones fell, knees locked, faces drained. Callahan staggered back like he'd been struck. She lowered her shirt calmly, met his eyes for the first time. Not angry. Not triumphant. Tired. My orders, she said quietly, were to observe. She looked around the room. You taught me everything I needed to know. Later, after the reprimands, the silence, the broken careers, she walked alone toward the airstrip, night wind tugging at her hair, the dragon hidden again beneath cloth and skin. She didn't look back. Because dignity doesn't shout. It doesn't threaten. Sometimes, it simply waits. Why did she walk toward the airstrip instead of the exit everyone expected her to take? The night air cut colder than the mess hall ever had. Floodlights hummed in the distance, casting long shadows across the concrete like scars that never quite healed. Boots echoed behind her, measured, hesitant, but she didn't turn around. She already knew who it was. She always did. Regret has a sound. Tonight it followed her in uneven steps. Ma'am, Colonel Mitchell called softly, careful not to let the word sound like a command. Lieutenant Brennan. She stopped, not because she was ordered to, but because she chose to. Choice mattered, it always had. Yes, sir. He approached until they stood under the spill of a single light. Up close, the years showed on his face. Not weakness, experience. The kind that learned too late which battles mattered most. I owe you an apology, he said, not rehearsed, not defensive, just heavy, for what happened, for what I allowed. She studied him for a moment, then glanced past his shoulder toward the dark outline of the base. You saw what you needed to see, she replied. That was the point. He exhaled slowly. Still, no one should be treated like that. Her lips pressed together, not in disagreement but recognition. And yet they are, every day, in places just like this. Silence settled between them, the kind that wasn't awkward, just honest. Inside the mess hall, the base was unraveling in quiet ways. Phones confiscated, statements recorded, command lines buzzing with clipped voices and coded language. Sergeant Callahan sat alone now, elbows on knees, staring at the floor like it might swallow him whole. He hadn't spoken since the salute. He replayed it over and over, the moment the dragon appeared, the way the room had shifted, The way power drained out of him like blood from an open wound. He had spent his life believing strength was something you took, something you enforced. Tonight had proven him wrong. Across the base, Private Hudson leaned against a wall, heart still racing. He hadn't meant to be brave, he'd just spoken. And somehow that had mattered more than anything he'd done in uniform so far. He wondered what his grandfather would say. Probably nothing. Just that quiet nod. The one that meant you'd done right. Victoria reached the edge of the runway and stopped. The transport plane waited in silence, engines dark, not leaving yet. Not done. Mitchell hesitated, then asked the question he'd been carrying since the mess hall. Why stay undercover so long? She didn't answer immediately. Her gaze traced the horizon where darkness met darker shapes. Because truth behaves differently when it thinks no one important is watching. He nodded slowly. When people think power isn't present, she continued, they show you who they really are, not who they salute, not who they perform for. A gust of wind lifted her hair. She didn't fix it. I wasn't here to catch bad soldiers, she said. I was here to understand the culture that creates them. Behind them, boots approached again, this time heavier, slower. Callahan stopped a few steps away, shoulders squared by habit, eyes hollowed by something new, awareness. Ma'am, he said, his voice cracked just barely, permission to speak freely. She turned to face him. Granted. He swallowed. I thought strength meant never letting anyone see weakness. I thought if I stayed on top, no one could hurt me. She watched him closely now, not judging, assessing. And tonight, she asked. Tonight I realized I was afraid, he admitted. Afraid of being irrelevant. Afraid of someone like you walking in and proving I was never as strong as I pretended to be. The words came out rough, honest, uncomfortable. She nodded once. Fear doesn't make you weak, Sergeant. What you do with it does. His jaw tightened. I don't expect forgiveness. You're not owed it, she replied evenly. But you are responsible for what comes next. He straightened, accepting the weight of that truth. What comes next, she continued, is whether you choose to change, or whether tonight becomes just another story you tell yourself to sleep. She turned away before he could answer. Because redemption, she knew, wasn't a speech. It was a decision made every morning when no one was watching. As she boarded the plane, the quiet followed her again. Familiar, welcome. Inside, she sat alone, strapped in, hands resting loosely on her thighs. The dragon slept beneath fabric and skin, but its presence grounded her. It always had. Her wrist device pulsed once. New assignment. Another base, another mess hall, another version of the same story waiting to unfold. She closed her eyes, not tired but reflective. She thought about the young soldier who spoke up, about the ones who laughed because it was easier than thinking, about the ones who filmed instead of intervening, about how thin the line was between cruelty and courage. She had walked that line her entire career. The engines roared to life. As the plane lifted, Fort Davidson shrank into darkness, a test completed, data gathered, lessons learned by some. She didn't know if the base would truly change. Culture never did overnight, but seeds had been planted, uncomfortable ones, necessary ones. And somewhere inside those walls, a few soldiers would wake up tomorrow carrying a question they hadn't asked before. What kind of strength do I really believe in? The plane disappeared into the night. And far below, the mess hall lights flickered off one by one, leaving behind silence, memory, and the slow, difficult work of becoming better. Because sometimes the most powerful missions don't end with applause. They end with reflection. And sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the memory of that mess hall follow her into the dark, instead of fatting with altitude? The plane leveled off, engines settling into a steady, almost soothing rhythm. For most people, this was the part where adrenaline faded and sleep crept in. For her, this was when the noise got louder. Not outside, inside. She rested her head back, eyes open, watching the dim cabin lights blur into soft halos. Faces from Fort Davidson drifted through her thoughts, not as they were at the end, stunned and silent, but as they had been before the reveal. Laughing, filming, certain. Certainty was dangerous. She learned that young. Her wrist device pulsed again, but she ignored it this time. Some orders could wait a minute. Some thoughts needed space. She remembered another mess hall, different base, different country, years ago. Back then she hadn't worn a uniform at all, just a borrowed hoodie, dirt under her nails, blood drying on her sleeve that wasn't hers. The men at the table hadn't laughed. They dismissed her. Worse, they'd ignored her. "You sure she's cleared for this?" someone had muttered. She stood there, silent, letting the moment stretch, letting them underestimate, because sometimes being invisible was the safest place in the room. The mission that followed had gone wrong in the quietest way possible. No explosions, no heroics, just a misjudgment. A door cleared too late, a teammate who didn't make it out. She still remembered the sound his gear made when it hit the floor. The plane jolted lightly, turbulence or memory. Her fingers curled slightly, grounding herself. Breathe in, 4, hold, out, 6. The old rhythm settled her again. At Fort Davidson, Callahan's face had haunted her more than she expected. Not the arrogance, the collapse after, the moment he realized the world wasn't built the way he thought. She'd seen that look before, in herself. They landed just before dawn, a smaller airstrip this time, quieter, no ceremony, no waiting officers, just a single SUV and a driver who didn't ask questions. She climbed in, pulling her jacket tighter as cold morning air seeped through the seams. The road ahead cut through forest and fog, headlights carving tunnels through gray. "You want music?" the driver asked. "No," she said gently, "thank you." Silence suited her. The safe house was nondescript, intentional, beige walls, simple furniture, nothing personal, nothing permanent. She set her bag down and stood by the window as the sun crept up. Another day starting somewhere else. Another version of normal, pretending everything was fine. Her device chimed again. This time she answered. A face filled the screen, older, same eyes, same steady calm. "You always go quiet after," her sister said. Victoria smiled faintly. "You always notice." "Base assessment?" her sister asked. She nodded, "Messy." "They always are." A pause stretched between them, comfortable, shared. "Did they push you?" her sister asked. "They tried," Victoria replied. "I let them." Her sister studied her through the screen. "You okay?" Victoria hesitated, just long enough to be honest. "I am, but it still costs something." Her sister nodded. "It should, otherwise it wouldn't matter." They talked logistics, next steps. No emotion wasted on what couldn't be changed. That was their unspoken rule. Before the call ended, her sister added softly, "You did good work." Victoria looked away toward the rising light. "We'll see." After the call, she sat on the edge of the bed, boots still on. The room felt too quiet now. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small, worn notebook. No markings, no names. She didn't write reports in it. She wrote truths. Today, she wrote only one sentence. Power reveals itself when it thinks no one is watching. She closed the notebook and exhaled. Later that morning, a knock came at the door. A local liaison, new assignment details, another installation, another culture to observe. As he spoke, she caught herself drifting again, back to the young private who spoke up. The way his voice had shaken but not broken. She hoped someone noticed. She hoped someone protected that instinct instead of grinding it down. Because militaries didn't fail from lack of strength. They failed from teaching the wrong people what strength looked like. She signed the paperwork and stood, rolling her shoulders as if shedding an invisible weight. "Anything else, ma'am?" the liaison asked. She considered the question, then shook her head. "No." But as he left, she added quietly to the empty room, "Not yet." That night she stood outside under unfamiliar stars. The dragon beneath her skin felt warm, alive, not as a symbol of dominance but of balance, fire and restraint, power and patience. She thought about how easily dignity could be mistaken for weakness, how often silence was read as surrender. She knew better. She had built a career on letting others be wrong about her. Somewhere another mess hall buzzed with laughter. Somewhere someone stood alone under fluorescent lights, pretending not to care. And somewhere the line between cruelty and courage waited to be crossed again. Victoria turned back inside, already preparing herself to walk that line once more. Because resilience isn't loud. It doesn't demand recognition. It survives, it adapts, it waits. And when the moment comes, it reminds the world who it is. Why did the briefing room fall silent the moment she took the empty chair at the back? No one had announced her, no rank introduction, no cleared throat to draw attention. She simply entered, scanned the room once, and sat down like she belonged there, because she did, even without the uniform screaming it. The room was full of noise before that, casual confidence, inside jokes, a commander packing with a marker in hand, half listening to his own words. Screens glowed with maps and timelines. Coffee steamed. Someone laughed too loudly. Then she sat. The laughter thinned. Conversations tapered off, not because they recognized her, but because something in the air changed. Some people carried silence with them. She was one of those people. She folded her hands loosely on the table, back straight, eyes forward, not trying to impress, not trying to disappear. Just present. The commander cleared his throat and resumed. "As I was saying, this exercise will test response time and coordination under stress. We've had issues." A few heads nodded, some exchanged knowing looks. She listened without reacting. Let them talk, let them assume. This base was different from the last. Smaller, tighter, less overt arrogance, but more subtle fractures. The kind that didn't shout. The kind that whispered behind closed doors and showed itself only when no one thought accountability was in the room. She felt it already. The briefing continued. A simulated hostage extraction, urban terrain, night insertion, on paper straightforward, in reality full of the kind of variables that revealed how teams treated one another when plans unraveled. "Questions?" the commander asked. Hands went up, tactical ones, equipment concerns, weather. Then one voice near the front, "Sir, who's she?" Eyes turned, not hostile, curious, measuring. The commander hesitated, a fraction too long. "That's an observer," he said finally. "Temporary attachment." Observer. The word settled on her shoulders like a familiar weight, neutral, safe, dismissible. She met no one's gaze, didn't correct him, didn't introduce herself. Yet, the exercise began that night. She watched from the command vehicle as teams deployed into the mock city, floodlights off, night vision flickering to life. Movements clean, efficient. On the surface, everything worked. Too smoothly. That was usually the first sign. Inside one unit, a young female communications specialist struggled to keep pace. Not physically, mentally. Orders came fast, contradictory. No one slowed down to confirm understanding. "Keep up," someone snapped. She stumbled once, regained footing, jaw tight. Victoria noticed. She always noticed the ones trying not to be noticed. The mission hit its first complication when a simulated explosive went off early, triggered by a rushed call, not bad luck. Confusion rippled through the team. Voices overlapped. No one took responsibility. "Move," the team leader barked. "Just move." They moved, but not together. The breach failed, hostage compromised, exercise terminated. Silence followed, heavy, defensive. In the debrief room, blame moved like smoke, never settling, never owned. If comms hadn't lagged, if intel had been clearer, if she'd been faster. Victoria's fingers tightened once, then relaxed. She waited. The commander rubbed his temples. All right, enough, observer. He turned toward her at last. Every eye followed. She stood slowly. Not dramatically, just deliberately. What you saw tonight, she began, voice even, wasn't a tactical failure. It was a trust failure. Murmurs stirred. You don't listen to the quiet voices, she continued. You rush past uncertainty instead of resolving it. And when something goes wrong, you look for the nearest shield to hide behind. The room stiffened. She met the team leader's gaze, not accusing, honest. You talk about speed, she said, but speed without alignment is just panic with momentum. No one interrupted. She turned slightly, addressing the whole room now. Strength isn't volume, it's clarity. It's the discipline to slow down when slowing down feels risky. The communications specialist stared at the table, shoulders drawn in. Victoria noticed that too. She paused, letting the silence do its work. You're good soldiers, she said quietly, but you're not safe ones, not yet. The words landed harder than shouting ever could. She sat back down. No applause, no rebuttal. Just thought. Later outside, the night felt heavier than before. She leaned against the hood of the command vehicle, eyes on the stars she barely recognized. Footsteps approached. The communications specialist stopped a few feet away, uncertainty written across her posture. Ma'am, she said, I just wanted to say thank you for saying what you did. Victoria studied her, young, capable, carrying doubt she didn't deserve. You don't need me to say it, Victoria replied. You already knew. The woman nodded. Still, it helps to hear it out loud. Victoria smiled faintly. Hold on to that. The system won't always protect it. The woman hesitated, then asked, how do you stay steady when people underestimate you? Victoria considered the question, the honest one. I don't, she said. I just don't let it decide who I am. The woman absorbed that, then straightened. Yes, ma'am. As she walked away, Victoria felt the familiar ache settle in her chest. Not pain, exactly. The weight of caring in a profession that punished it. Back in her quarters, she removed her jacket and sat on the edge of the bed. The dragon pressed against her skin, a reminder of balance learned the hard way. She thought about all the moments that led here, all the rooms she'd entered unnoticed, all the times she'd chosen patience over pride. It hadn't made her softer. It had made her precise. Her device buzzed again, a message this time short. Evaluation complete, next phase approved. She closed her eyes. Another layer deeper. Another test. Not of tactics, but of character. Because the most dangerous failures were never loud. They were quiet agreements made over time, small compromises, unquestioned habits. She would walk into those spaces too. Not to dominate, not to destroy, but to reveal. Outside, the base settled into sleep. Inside, something had shifted just slightly, enough to matter. Change never announced itself. It whispered. And those who listened survived. Why did the call come at 02:17, when only people who expected bad news were still awake? The vibration on her wrist was sharp, insistent, not a request, a pull. Victoria opened her eyes without surprise. She learned long ago that sleep was a privilege, not a promise. She sat up, feet finding the floor before the second pulse came. Brennan, she said quietly. A pause, then a voice she hadn't heard in years, older now, slower. weighted with authority and something closer to regret. "We need you in the field," the voice said, "not as an observer." Her jaw tightened, just enough to acknowledge the shift. "Where?" she asked. Coordinates followed, a place that existed more on maps than in memory, a joint operation, friendly territory, unfriendly truth, an extraction that had stalled not because of enemy pressure but because trust inside the unit had fractured. "They're calling it a delay," the voice added, "but we're losing time and people." Victoria closed her eyes briefly, not to hesitate, to focus. "I'm in," she said. By dawn she was moving again, this time in full gear, no disguise, no ambiguity. The uniform fit differently when there was no pretending, heavier, honest. The transport was crowded, faces tight. No one spoke much. She caught fragments, complaints about leadership, muttered jokes masking nerves, silence where questions should have been. She listened. That was still her job. On the ground, the unit assembled in a shallow ravine. Maps spread across a crate, voices low but edged. The team leader, a captain with sharp eyes and a reputation built on decisiveness, briefed fast. "Too fast." "We go in quiet," he said. "Grab the asset, exfil in under 12. Someone shifted. "Sir, intel says local militia rotated positions last night." The captain waved it off. "Intel always says that." Victoria felt it then, the same pressure she'd felt years ago, the familiar warning that no one wanted to hear. She spoke before the plan locked itself in place. "What if Intel's right?" she asked. Heads turned. Some recognized her now, some didn't like what they saw. The captain frowned. "Ma'am, with respect." "With respect," she interrupted gently. "You're betting lives on being correct instead of being prepared." The room stilled. She stepped closer to the map. "If positions rotated, your entry corridor is compromised. You won't see it until it's too late." Silence stretched. The captain's jaw flexed, pride and responsibility wrestling in real time. Finally he nodded once. "Alternate route." She traced a line with her finger. "Narrower, slower, safer." "It costs you 8 minutes," she said, "but it gives you margin." Margin, the word hung there. "Do it," the captain said at last. They moved at dusk, terrain rough, air thin, every step measured. The team adjusted, grumbling at first, then quieting as the logic revealed itself. Night swallowed them whole. Halfway in they heard it, movement where there shouldn't have been any, shadows shifting, a whispered curse. The original route lit up with distant fire. The captain froze, then exhaled slowly. "Good call," he murmured. They continued, found the asset shaken but alive. No heroics, no speeches, just hands pulling someone back from the edge. On exfil a shot rang out, closer than it should have been. The communications specialist from the other base, the same one Victoria had noticed weeks earlier, went down hard. Not hit, twisted ankle, pain sharp and immediate. "Leave it," someone said. "We're tight on time." Victoria was already moving. She dropped beside her, fingers assessing, voice calm. "You can walk," she said, "but not alone." The specialist nodded, jaw clenched. They moved slower. Every step cost something. Behind them noise built, shouts, running, pressure. The captain glanced back, calculation flickering across his face. Victoria met his eyes. No words, just resolve. They made it out. Later, long after the adrenaline faded, the unit sat in silence under a dim light, dust-streaked, exhausted, alive. The captain approached her, helmet tucked under his arm. "I was wrong," he said simply. "No qualifiers, no excuses." She studied him. "You adjusted, that's what matters." He hesitated. "Why do you keep doing this?" She knew what he meant, the stepping in, the slowing down, the insistence on seeing what others ignored. "Because people confuse urgency with importance," she said, "and I've buried friends who paid for that mistake." He nodded. You don't lead like anyone I know." A faint smile touched her lips. "I wasn't trained to." That night alone again, she cleaned her gear with practiced motions. Each scrape of dirt told a story. Each scuff marked a choice. She thought of the specialist, now asleep with her ankle wrapped. Of the captain, quieter now. Of the narrow line they'd walked together. This time it hadn't broken. Her device chimed once more. Mission success, lessons noted. She closed her eyes, feeling the familiar mix settle in, relief braided with something heavier. Hope. Not the loud kind, the fragile kind, the kind that survived only if handled carefully. Outside, the wind moved through the ravine, erasing footprints one by one. By morning, there would be no sign they'd been there at all. Except in the people who walked away changed. Because sometimes strength doesn't announce itself in battle. Sometimes it shows up in the pause before a decision. In the willingness to listen. In the courage to carry others when it costs you time. And sometimes, the quietest person in the room is the reason everyone makes it home. Why did she hesitate at the edge of the runway when the mission was finally over? The sky was beginning to lighten. That soft gray that came before morning decided what kind of day it would be. Engines idled nearby, impatient. Around her, soldiers moved with the loose efficiency of people who had survived something together and weren't ready to talk about it yet. Victoria stood still. Not because she was tired, because endings were louder than beginnings. The captain she'd corrected, challenged, walked past her, then stopped. He turned, studying her as if trying to memorize something that would soon be gone. "They're rewriting the after-action report," he said quietly. "Leadership language, accountability, real accountability." She nodded. "Reports don't change people, conversations do." He smiled once, not the confident grin he'd worn before, something humbler. "Still, it matters." "It does," she agreed. He hesitated. "You won't be here to see it." "No," she said, "but you will." That was enough. As he walked away, she felt the familiar pull in her chest. Pride, maybe, or relief, or the ache that came from caring just enough to leave something better behind. Inside the transport, she took her seat by the window. The dragon beneath her skin pressed warm and steady like it always did when things were quiet. She rested her head back, eyes tracing the faint scratches on the metal wall. Someone before her had carved initials there once. Proof they'd existed. Proof they'd mattered. The plane lifted smoothly. Below, the ravine shrank. The base faded. Another place added to the long list of rooms she'd entered and left without ceremony. Her device buzzed, not an order this time, a message. From the communications specialist. "I walked today, limped but walked. Thank you for not leaving me." Victoria stared at the words longer than she needed to. She typed back only 3. "You were never alone." She set the device down and closed her eyes. Images drifted through her mind. The mess hall laughter, the dragon revealed, Callahan's collapse, the quiet courage of one voice speaking up, the moment a plan slowed just enough to save lives. None of it felt heroic. That was the point. Heroics were loud, clean, easy to celebrate. What stayed with you were the moments no one clapped for, the pauses, the decisions made without certainty. She thought about how many times she'd been underestimated, how often silence had been mistaken for weakness, how many rooms had needed someone willing to stand still long enough for truth to show itself. She didn't resent it anymore. Resentment was heavy, she traveled light. When the plane leveled out, she opened her eyes again. The horizon stretched wide and indifferent. The world didn't care who she was. That, too, was freeing. Somewhere, another base would wake up. Another mess hall would fill with noise. Another young soldier would wonder if they belonged. Victoria Brennan would walk into those spaces again, sometimes unnoticed, sometimes challenged, sometimes doubted. always prepared, because dignity wasn't something you demanded. It was something you carried, quietly, until the moment came when action was the only language left. The plane disappeared into the thinning clouds, and behind it, in places she would never return to, small changes took root. Conversations slowed, voices were heard, decisions were questioned instead of rushed. Not because of fear, because of respect. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It doesn't raise its voice or demand attention. Sometimes it simply acts.